What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the PokeTens podcast. I am so excited for today's episode. I've been a big fan of this PokeTuber for several years. I actually went back and Googled it, and I've been a fan since like his third video. Amazing content. He knows the vintage stuff so well, guys. It's Pokemon Classics. Matt from Pokemon Classics. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. It's summertime. I'm a high school teacher, so getting a little bit of break from the action of all the school chaos is kind of nice, especially since I can double down and get back to all the things I've fallen behind on, whether it's video making or just the collecting stuff, running the eBay store. So, like I said, it's a nice break. Definitely excited
Yeah.
to get back into school eventually, but having a few months off is needed. It's relaxing. So
Take a relaxing hunt for some PSA 10, number 17 Typhlosions, right? Nothing calms down like that.
pretty intense hunt. There's only a few of those out in the wild, and they are difficult.
Yeah, I was watching through some of your older videos because, again, I said in the intro, but I wanted to, because I know I've been watching you for a while. I just love, it feels so professional and you're so well spoken and it feels like really well put together. And everything you do, I'm like, this is a real collector that knows what he's talking about, which is super cool. And I watched one of yours when you're doing all your PSA 10s and a couple of the 9s for Genesis. Yeah, and the Typhlosion, and there was like 9 PSA 10s in that. And I went down a vintage rabbit hole after that. But why don't you tell me about is that one of your main sets you're collecting, or is it just sort of that whole Neo era that you love collecting? And how did you get into that?
Yeah, so I'll go through a little bit of the backstory first. I originally entered Pokemon back in 1999. I was kind of kicking and screaming, if I'm being honest. All my friends were into it. I didn't really see the appeal until we actually started playing the card game and like going through and actually handling the cards. Then
Yeah.
something clicked, and I was really interested. A few short years later, maybe even just a year later, I went to my local league and started doing league play. I sort of inherited the league, running the league when the existing adults that were running it could no longer do so. So that was thrust upon like 13-year-old me to like fill out all the paperwork, send it to Wizards of the Coast. And I'm not really sure like how like legit that was supposed to be, or like if there was an age requirement, but learned a lot of responsibility through that. And since then, my collecting journey has been continuous. I didn't really take any breaks, though. We could argue that once Pokemon was no longer mainstream and sold in all of the local retail stores, it became very difficult to find and acquire those collection pieces. But I had pretty clear goals even from an early age. And one of those initially was doing binder copies of all the Wizards of the Coast cards, primarily the holographic first edition sets, but also like the commons and uncommons and non-holo rares as I could find them. Since then, I got into grading back in like 2011, and I was like, great, this is a great way to display cards and kind of keep them safe and elevate the condition from the binder played, moderately played copies that I had. And so then that became the goal, was trying to hunt down all of the holos, first edition, through all the Wizards of the Coast era. So just basically base set through Neo Destiny, since that's the era that I was actively playing and collecting. The Sky Ridge and E series is wonderful, but that became a little too ambitious. So I've knocked out some of those sets. Others I'm still in the market for, and a lot of those are very difficult to find, especially some of the low population cards. Neo is probably the sets that are the most known for that.
Yeah.
Revelation in particular, Neo Genesis has some really low population cards. And then there's some sprinkled into Neo Destiny and Neo Discovery as well. But it's an ongoing goal. It's a very difficult one. I tell people this is basically a collecting stalemate, because at this point, it's like, in order to get the money to buy the cards that I need, I've got to sell some of the ones that I already have. And then it just, takes us back to square one.
Yeah, and I was gonna say too, not a lot of people are selling those or like some of the rare ones in a 10 anyway, because there's so much scarcity with them. Like it's hard, and I feel like people, once they have it, don't want to give it up. It's very different than a modern market where people are moving them all the time.
Yeah, the liquidity is certainly there with a lot of those modern cards, but with some of the really low population ones, PSA 10s, if there's only 15 to 20 copies out there in the wild, you might be waiting a while to find one. And when you do, it's often people that don't really intend to sell it, but are just floating it out there. So the prices are a bit unrealistic for my purposes.
Yeah, we'll float it out. We'll see if we can get a house by the water for this card, and if not, I think we'll keep it in the collection. Yeah, yeah. That's also funny that as a 13-year-old, you were doing all the paperwork for it. That sounds like a collector's dream, doing a bunch of paperwork at the age of
It
13.
was fairly comprehensive too. At the end of each week, they'd make you like record the number of league attendees that were there. You'd have to
Really?
like record the store's address and some of their like sales information. So
Yeah.
yeah, I had to like check in with the manager at the store and like figure out like how much product was sold. Had to go through inventory of like how many
Oh,
promo
man.
cards we still had, and like it was fun though. Like it was such an honor to be bestowed that, especially when you're looking around with a bunch of your peers and like this is a lot of responsibility and trust me.
Yeah.
Also getting that stamper and going through the badge books and like having the power to get people their promo cards or their badges was all dependent upon like my subjective opinion of like, did you do enough to earn it?
Yeah, so you're your friends group's gym leader, basically. You were handing out the badges.
Essentially, yeah.
There it is. Okay, quick question: if you were to be a gym leader, what type of Pokemon are you bringing?
Ooh, I played quite a bit, and the decks that I always found the most fun were probably the electric decks. I had a Rocket Zapdos deck that was really fond of. It had the Dark Dragonite line in it since they were really great at like summoning evolutions through their Pokemon powers. But the other one that I really enjoyed was there was a grass deck that I called my bench destruction deck. It had various cards that would just deal damage to the bench rather than the active Pokemon. And so that was just a fun one to play because it wasn't the best deck out there, but it was so frustrating for opponents to go against that it just made it that much more fun.
It's unique. It catches them off guard. I love playing the video game competitively online, like trying to climb the ladder and all that. And sometimes it's so fun to just put together a team and you're like, all right, we're using toxic spikes, we're poisoning, and we're slowly whittling down. It's fun to see. You mentioned Rocket Zapdos also. That is my all-time number one favorite card. Number one all-time favorite card.
It's a great card. I was playing competitively in the qualifier for the Super Trainer Showdown in 2001. I got absolutely smacked down with a Rocket Zapdos deck. So that became the prototype for something that I basically copied and restructured in my own way so that I could
Yeah.
get back home to my local league and put everybody in their place.
Oh, amazing! I got a first edition one not too long ago, and I was so excited. It came with a beautiful swirl, and it's just one of those things that like I could look at it all day. I could look at that.
Well, it's
Oh,
winning on
man.
both ends because it's highly playable card at its time, but it's also a beautiful card. Like the artwork
Yeah.
on it is probably the best Zapdos, I think, of the original vintage set.
I think so too. I think so too. Jim, I mean that whole set is gorgeous too. Oh, you mentioned too that when you started out, you said you were very like focused on your collecting goals. This is something I wanted to ask you about actually, because I find, or people that I've talked to that maybe have started or got back into it the last couple of years, as so many people have. And they see, on social media and YouTube, and everyone's opening a million packs, and they're opening vintage packs, and they're opening new packs. And it gets overwhelming, and you're like, I want to be participating in this. I want to be able to do all of this. And they kind of go in without a collector's goal. And a lot of people who want to collect maybe singular cards or a single thing end up with all this bulk that they don't want, or paying premiums for opening the products when they could have just got their card. It took me a while, and my things have shifted a lot. Like I went through a phase where I was trying to collect all the elite trainer boxes of a certain era. And at one point that became sort of unreasonable to me. And I realized that I actually really enjoyed having the cards more than that. I love them as display pieces. I still have elite trainer boxes from sets that I really appreciate, but I sort of shifted and I sold off some stuff and was able to put it back into the singular cards. And I found like that gave me more joy. And that's something I wish I found even sooner or had reworked earlier. So how did you come up with your collecting goals? And how are you able to stay disciplined and actually complete them? Because it's very easy to stray off with so much out there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the pieces of advice that I think a lot of people in this content space would offer out to those that are just coming back or starting out is to definitely define your collection goals early on so that you're not drifting into too many places and you don't end up having too much sunk costs into things that you ultimately aren't as concerned about or don't have a long-term interest in preserving.
Mhm.
My goals were very organic because I was running this league and I got to watch the development and the release of each successive set from Wizards of the Coast. So pretty much every card that I'm collecting that's part of my goal has that larger like nostalgic piece for me, but also really visceral, tangible memories tied to it. And so having those artworks and having them in a binder initially as they were being released was something that I still have to this day. I still have that original binder with some of the beat up copies of those cards. And then from there, it was okay, now that I have these cards, and some of them were unlimited, some were first edition, some were really beat up and folded in half multiple times. So I was just trading for whatever I happened to see at the league, like who had the card that I needed to fill in that spot. This was
Yeah.
a way to take it up a notch, especially as I have more financial resources as now I'm an adult rather than, a 13-year-old child at a league. But also that displayability piece, it just looks so much more professional to have them encapsulated. And that's kind of how the goal emerged. And I limited it down to just those cards that I had some sort of meaningful emotional connection to.
Yeah.
Great looking cards out there. You don't need me to tell you that like modern is arting on a level that is unseen before. Like even as
Oh,
somebody that loves vintage, there are beautiful artworks out there, but
mhm,
they don't mean as much to me because I didn't grow up with them. Uh,
mhm.
you mentioned like the rabbit holing though and getting strayed off into other collection goals. I do think that's something that can be fun to do in moderation, that as you like accomplish certain things, you find new things that appeal to you, then maybe branch off into some of those more niche areas. And I do
Yeah.
that occasionally. I think that's fun. And sometimes there are like really easy collection goals to like supplement. That way you do feel like you're making progress and discovering new things, learning new supplements about like the early history of the hobby or some area of the market that you've previously been unaware of. Because there's just always something to learn, and that's what's so great about this is how striated, how diverse, how
Yeah.
all encompassing this hobby really is.
I know, I know. And like for me, I feel, and a lot of people my age too, I feel like a lot of people sort of drifted away in the middle eras. And it's like, I want to go back and revisit that. And I'm excited because I know there's going to be people that started in that era, and to go back and them, like how we feel about a Rocket Zapdos, that might be how they feel about a certain Zekrom or something like that, right? And to hear that from them, it's super cool. It's such a diverse collecting scape. And I mean, I don't want to, I'm not here to talk about myself, but I started a new collecting goal recently. And it's just one of those little things that I'm like, I'm having so much fun because you mentioned the artwork is so brilliant. And so I've started a binder of just art rares from the Japanese sets. And a lot of these cards, because they come three in a booster pack, a lot of these cards are $2, $3. So I'm able to get this whole 12 card binder of beautiful new artwork for 25 bucks Canadian. So, $4 American or whatever it is at this point. But it's like just this little new thing. Every paycheck, I'm like, I'm just going to put 25 bucks into this and slowly fill up this binder and remember this era, because I also have loved the Scarlet Violet era, and I've loved playing the game and stuff. So to me, that's just like a little example of how you can bridge off and still keep goals and still collect vintage stuff, but you can still enjoy a new era or newer stuff that's happening in a reasonable way that doesn't blow up and cost you everything.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that a little bit, I think
Yeah.
sometimes there's a lot of criticism out there about like gatekeeping within the hobby where people are like, you exclusively have to just like vintage. Anything that's new is horrible. Or
Yeah.
inversely, people that are like, modern's the only thing that's ever going to move because that's where the popularity is. Vintage is old, it's boring. And I think there's strong qualities to both. So you don't have to be limited into just like one of those two dynamics or any other subdivision that people claim exists within the hobby. It's all about what you're interested in, what you like, what you have a connection to. And like I said, it can branch out over time.
Yeah.
These little mini collection goals that I find myself working through. Many of them are tied to history and to vintage, but I like the Black Star promo set, and those are pretty cheap. They're easy to acquire. So that's been something I've been tackling offhand. They don't all have to be PSA 10. Some of them are really difficult to find, like the Venusaur, really
Yeah.
expensive. I'm like, yeah, I want to supplement the collection with those, or maybe I want to get the W stamped promos. There's only like 7 or 8 of them or whatever, so very easy collection goal to fulfill.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask this question too, and you brought up that they're not all PSA 10s. I know there's a whole like, I don't want to say a stigma behind it, but a lot of people are like, it's PSA 10 or nothing, unless it's again like a super rare, where a 9 is like, there's still only 150 of those. How do you feel about a collector? And maybe you could talk about somebody that's newer to collecting, starting by just collecting, a lower grade thing just because they love the card.
Yeah, I mean, if you love the card, there's no reason why you couldn't just be a raw binder collector. No one's saying that you
True.
have to go like right to the pinnacle and say it's PSA 10 or bust. In my
Hmm.
situation, I started grading in 2011. I acquired a lot of these cards before they were astronomically expensive. That's what gave the collecting challenge. And a lot of the cards I have placeholders with PSA 9s. And that's what made it interesting was try to elevate each one of those. But if somebody were starting out now with a lot of those cards and you're just in it as a pure collector and you love the artworks, PSA 9 is generally a much better value for a
Yeah.
comparable condition. Like, unless you're going through with a microscope and a high intensity light and you're looking at the cards in that level of detail, there's no judgment for settling with something lower. Even a
No.
Nearmint 7 or 8, eight's a really good value too, and that's almost just as good. Maybe there's a print line on it, but you're never gonna notice that from a distance.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just stuff on the back, and you're like, I want to display it, and I don't see the little whitening in the corner in the back. And now I can get 10 cool cards for my collection instead of one PSA 10. So I always am like, I love a PSA 8 or a PSA 9 option. I think it's phenomenal. Honestly, I'll take a 7 in a Zapdos Legendary Reverse collection all day. All day. That's very cool. So do you have a favorite set of all time?
Yeah, there's a few that I would qualify in there as the, like, favorites, but I guess if I were pressed to choose my favorite set, I would go with Neo Destiny. I love
Yeah.
the Neo sets. It was, like, the last set that I had, a lot of exposure to it running the league and actually, like, collecting in person with other people. It introduced the light Pokemon, the dark
Yeah.
Pokemon. I guess the dark were earlier in Team Rocket, but the shining cards in there as well. It's just a really cool set. It's also one that wasn't printed as heavily. So
Yeah.
that's probably my favorite. We were talking about this before we went on, and we already mentioned the Rocket Zapdos, but Gym Challenge, I think, is one of my favorite sets of all time. There are just so many artworks in there that are great, and they're a bit edgier and more aggressive than in Gym Hero since they're more of like the villainous
Yeah.
leaders. Like the Rockets, Mewtwo is a good one, the Rockets Zapdos, the Blaine's Arcanine, the Blaine's
That
Charizard.
Blaine's Arcanine is gorgeous.
Yeah. Uh,
Is that the one with Giovanni's Persian too? Yeah.
one I was just about to mention.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful set. So that one would be on the list. Uh, yeah, I'd probably pick those 2 as my tops at the
Yeah.
moment.
The Dark Gengar too from Destiny is one of my favorite all-time artworks. It's scary. I remember like seeing it as a kid and be like, that's spooky.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah.
It's got
I
like a
love
weird, almost like crayon sort of
yeah. Bring it up.
impressionistic art style too.
Yeah, I just brought it up just on my other screen just because I wanted to look at it. And it's spooky, it's weird, it's haunting. Not haunter, but it's haunting. And then, oh, see, these are gorgeous. I almost just was like, I forgot I was recording a podcast. I'm just going to look at this dark Ampharos for an hour.
Can easily happen. You rabbit hole down and you find something you're interested in. That's again what's great about this hobby is you're always
Yeah.
going to discover something and walk away with that new level of appreciation.
So you have
This amazing collection, and we're talking about looking at these cards. How often do you just take time to go through and look at them? Do you ever just take a day and go through, or you're like, hey, I forgot I had this? Like, how do you go about displaying them or looking through them to remember how great the artwork and the collections are?
Yeah, that's a complicated answer actually, because some of my cards I have like in various storage areas. Some are vaulted at the moment.
mhm.
I do have some like those slightly lower to mid value cards I keep around and on display, and I like to rotate them out so different days or at different situations I'm seeing different artwork, so it's not always the same thing.
Yeah.
Uh, Often I'm listing cards on eBay or sending cards to PSA, so that's where I'm rifling through some of those things that have been stored for a long time, and I'm like, "Man, I forgot I had this box with these cards in it. Wait, when did I get all these Japanese holos? These are kinda cool." And then you start appreciating and recognizing like, "Yeah, the card stock is so much better on Japanese. I forgot about how much that holo really
It,
pops."
it pops.
Japanese.
It's pretty rare that I would, like, have any sort of situation where I could just flip through an entire, like, collection of items,
Right.
but I'm constantly being exposed to different ones in different situations, and so it does kinda cycle through, uh, with something new on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, hey, I might be the number one fan of videos of seeing sets or close to master sets of the older stuff. So if you ever feel like breaking another one out, I'll watch it. I promise I'll watch it. I've got a question from a fan. So I got a couple actually. One of them we discussed off camera as we were starting, but I want them to know this because this is cool. So, do you remember what your first card was, and what's the story behind that?
All right, so my first card ever was a Shadowless Raichu card, and I was at a friend's birthday party. I wasn't really initially into Pokemon until all my friends dragged me into it, and I was a little bit hesitant. But once we actually played the card game and were like flipping through cards physically, tangibly, then something clicked. And so we're at his birthday party. He was buying some cards from a local card store, and I had some money with me, and I was like, all right, I'll buy a card. I knew about Pikachu. I saw the Raichu card. I thought it was like a weird deviation of Pikachu, and that would make it more valuable or more interesting. So I was like, I'm gonna buy that one. My friends tried to dissuade me from doing that, and they're like, dude, just buy like 4 packs. And I was like, no, I'm gonna buy that. So it cost me $15. My mom was super upset with me at the time. And I came back home. She was like, you spent $15 on a piece of cardboard. And I was like, it looks cool. So I kind of got the last laugh in that situation because now it's the complete opposite. She's like, I can't believe those cards are worth anything these days. If I would have known back then. So it's a fun dynamic when I'm talking with my parents now. But that was my first card. I still have it. It's up in display in my office. There's like several creases in it. It traveled with me for a number of years. It's been through some things.
That's the best cards, though. Sometimes that's way better than a PSA 10. And we talked about it. The first holo I ever got from a base set pack was a Zapdos. And you said that your first holo pull was that Zapdos as well. So it's like that memory for me. That's why Zapdos became my favorite. I've got a Zapdos birthday card behind me from a Pokemon birthday party not long ago. And it's just stuck with me. And I've loved everything Zapdos. I have a binder of just raw Zapdos cards that I've accumulated over the years. And that one's a fun one for me to go look through and just see different eras and how much cool. Also, I feel like Zapdos has had amazing artwork so many times. So
by far the best of the legendary birds. Yeah, that was, I think, the only holo from base set that I ever pulled was I got 1 pack of base set from the mall when I was with my parents and grandparents. And it was a shadowless pack. I remember that because it was a shadowless Zapdos inside, and I must have spent like the rest of the day, maybe several hours straight, just staring at it in disbelief.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if you ever played Pokemon Go, but when I started that, Team Instinct, gotta join Zapdos.
Gotta be Team Instinct. I did. I've actually always loved playing the games. So I've kept up. I've played it way more than I ever played the TCG, but I just loved collecting the cards and I loved playing the games. So we got a little Team Instinct in us. I've got 2 more questions for you if you're up for it, Matt.
Up for it.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so this is an interesting one because you even just brought up opening those packs, and like I remember that was the same thing. I was at a Walmart with my dad when I got that first pack, and I remember loving all the I specifically remember loving the Ghastly in there just because I thought it was so cool. So I was gonna ask, do you have a favorite card that's a non-rare? So this is a question from a fan too, like a non-rare or non-holo, just a common or an uncommon. Do you have a favorite card?
Yeah, there's a few that hit really hard for me. One is from Neo Destiny, my favorite set. The light Jolteon in there snuggling up with the Togepi is such a cool artwork. That's just an uncommon, and it's kind of surprising that the 3 evolutions all have a light version, and they're all just uncommons in that set.
Right. Yeah. Look at that one. That one's really cool. I'm looking at it right. That's a great uncommon.
Yeah. There's a lot of great artworks in that set in general.
Yeah.
The Haunter from base set is one that I always liked. I've been under I know this is going to be controversial. I'm going to throw it out there anyway. But I think Haunter is the superior evolution to Gengar, and that they messed up the order, that it should have gone Ghastly, Gengar, Haunter. Because think about it. You've got a disembodied head with floating, like, grabby claw hands. That is way more intimidating.
I love that take by you. I'm not going to lie. I don't think I've ever thought of that, but like, I might not argue that. Haunter's way more intimidating.
Haunter's the way to go. And in particular, I think the artwork of Haunter from Fossil Set, which is a rare and is a holo, is one of the more intimidating Haunter artworks out there.
That's cool. I also liked back then, because it doesn't happen a whole lot, but when you got a rare holo and it wasn't a finished evolution, it was cool to see. It was cool to see. It's like its own little unique thing.
It's even weird when they're in the same set. There's a few sets that have done that where you have like Haunter and Gengar both had a rare holo in Fossil, or you take Neo Discovery where Houndour and Houndoom both have
Yeah,
in the same set.
the Honduras. That's I love Honduras too. I love that Honduras card. Those are also, I don't know, the not to be the guy talking about it, and I promise I won't, but the new Houndoom card that came out that I just ordered in Japanese, I'm so excited for it to come. It looks so cool. Houndoom is one of my all-time favorites, and I feel like they do such great artwork with it consistently.
Yeah, there's never a bad Houndoom.
No, there really isn't. All right, very cool. And I just wanted to finish up by talking. So on your channel, you talk a lot about the market, and I think it's done in a really great way too, because there's a lot of those channels floating around, and I don't want to say I have anything against them, but there's a lot of just like investing advice. Here's what I think. Go buy $2,000 worth of booster boxes and sit on them for 12 years, which isn't realistic for a lot of people. But it is cool to see what trends are happening, especially when it comes to vintage things, because I feel like a lot of people follow the modern market so closely, but they might not be in tune with the vintage stuff. So I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about the vintage market recently, especially after the big boom from a couple of years ago? Do you feel like it's settled down a bit? Do you feel like there's more interest in that, or are you noticing that there's just more interest in the modern stuff? What's your overall take on it?
Yeah, so first I just want to say that like I've always found an interesting intersection between the educational type of historical content that I'm driven to. I am a teacher after all, so I'm predisposed to that.
Yeah.
But then also like looking at what the market is doing, looking at prices, I think is interesting from more of an educational standpoint. I wouldn't really consider myself like an investor dumping tens of thousands of dollars in for the quick flip. I'm looking at it through more of a lens of a collector or maybe an observer, I guess you could say. In terms of the vintage market, though, I do really like looking at trends and providing some analysis and commentary on where I see those trends going. You mentioned the big boom. We've never really experienced anything like that back in 2020, and it was really the perfect storm for a lot of factors: the media attention, the pandemic relief spending, people locked in their houses without anything to do and rediscovering those old passions. So I don't know if we'll ever see anything quite like that. But
Mhm.
inversely, we have seen smaller iterations of that previously. Back in like 2012, when social media was just starting to take hold and there were some content creators just emerging on YouTube opening packs, there was a little bit of a spike in interest there where suddenly eBay had active inventory and people were buying and selling there. So there was a
Okay.
noticeable dip. Then again, in 2016, when Pokemon Go came out, there was a major uptick in sales, total amount of liquidity, the prices on items that experienced a pretty broad pullback in 2017 immediately afterwards. So I think we've seen this cycle play out a couple times just on a much lesser scale. And I don't
Mhm.
know if we'll ever hit those pandemic highs again in terms of the prices that some of these cards were selling for. But I do think that the market is at a place where it's hitting that price floor and stabilizing. I did a video recently looking at Charizard cards specifically, and you can definitely see that massive uptick followed by that massive correction, and then it's like flatlining. And maybe in the case of some of them, particularly the PSA 8s and PSA 9s, it seems to be ticking up just a little bit. Might be an anomaly. Might just be another little like wave in the overall trend line. But
Yeah.
it makes sense to me that within a couple years after one of those major spikes, that eventually that level of saturation on the market when everybody's liquidating at the same time, like, ooh, this is worth some money. I need to sell, and it's losing value, so I'm going to sell now. But eventually those get consolidated by collectors out there that actually appreciate them or just want to hold them for the long term, believing
Right.
in the potential of the hobby 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing is the consolidation of a lot of those items. And now we'll either hit that point of stability or perhaps a little bit of more linear organic growth rather than the massive volatile swooshes that we've seen.
You know what? I'm good with that. I can take a little upward trend if it makes sense to me and it's easy to follow.
Well, it's
Um,
healthier too. It's healthier for the market. It's healthier for collectors that want to participate. You saw the negative effects of the pandemic where kids couldn't get cards at Walmart or
I
Target,
know.
just weren't there. And if this market is going to be stable, that's what it needs to cater towards is the casual fans, the younger fans. They're the lifeblood of the hobby. So I do think there needs to be a balance, steady organic growth. I think that's the best we can all ask for.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And honestly, like talking about another reason why I've loved this era is For the last year, I've been seeing my partner, and she's got a little one, and so I've started him on Pokemon cards, and to like see him falling in love with these cards, and seeing just like the love of a common card, and he's learning how to read by using these cards and things like that, and I'm like, that's that's why I loved it as a kid. So it needs that access to be with the kids, and they need to be able to play and have fun with it, and like it doesn't need to be about this card's $200 with a 7-year-old. It shouldn't be about that. And I remember you on one of your last videos too, you even talked about Card Party, and you said a lot of it was catered towards kids, and that's the way it should be. And man, I agree with that. I think it's an awesome way to grow and like have our generation connect with another generation, with a younger generation, and sort of bridge that, and just, I don't know, share our passion with it, and we'll figure it out as it goes.
There's a level of stewardship that I think we're all responsible for, regardless of how you interact in the market. If you're a business, if you're a collector, if you're a combination of the two, doesn't really matter. And that doesn't mean you have to like be constantly self-sacrificing and take a financial loss on everything. But I do think we need to be cognizant of those that are coming after us, that is at least something that's really important to me. And Pat Flynn, got to shout him out. He knows that better than anybody. And for those that have watched coverage of Card Party or were there in person, that's really what he's capitalizing on, is making it a great experience for the kids. And I think that's great for everyone, that if they're able to be invested on an emotional level and have those same types of experiences that I had when I was running the league.
Yeah.
That it's not just about like the cards themselves, but about all the experiences, the emotional connection, the social relationships that are built when you're trading and interacting with like-minded individuals. And it really is a beautiful thing.
It is. It is. It's cool to see friendships grow over it. And Matt, I feel like a friendship has grown a bit today. I appreciate you coming on and doing this with me. It's been so much fun. It's been so cool to hear you talk about a passion of yours. I can't say enough good things about you and your channel. I wish you all the best of luck. If you're watching this on my channel, please go subscribe to Pokemon Classics if you haven't already. Matt is the absolute best, and I'm sure through the summer we're going to put him to work. He said he's going to take a relaxing summer. We want a video a day, Matt.
Not happening. Videos that I make, oh man, they take a long time to put together. And
I bet.
Do they take like a full 8-12 hours of editing at least?
Depends on the video. Like the news recap video that I just made, between scripting, filming, the research, the editing, probably about 30 hours.
Yeah.
Video.
Yeah.
But I make the content that I like to make, and it's partially like the engagement piece, but also it keeps me aligned with the market and looking at other aspects of Pokemon and news. So I want them to be fun, and that's ultimately what I'm after.
There you go. There you go. Matt, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And this is great. Really enjoy talking with people. This is the best part of the hobby, is getting to connect with people.
Absolutely. We'll have you on down the road. How's that sound?
That sounds wonderful.